I call the Finance Committee to order. Is there any discussion from any of the members? No? Okay. I need a sponsor for a resolution approving abstract of audit claims. Can I get a sponsor? Barb, a second. Ryan, any discussion? All those in favor of moving to full board?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Carries. I need a sponsor for a resolution appointing a member to the audit committee.
I'll sponsor.
Brian?
Second.
Can I have, can I make a motion to amend to insert Alex?
I'll sponsor.
Okay. All those in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All those in favor of the resolution as amended?
Aye.
Okay. Then, under other, we have 4 add-on resolutions. Has everyone gotten a chance to read the yellow sheets dealing with MOSA? Okay. Can I get a sponsor for the resolution amending 2014 operating budget, solid waste operation and transportation? Barb? A second. Alex? Any discussion? Barb?
Yes, I talked with Dan about the computer equipment, and he thinks that we'll be able to come in well under the $4,000 mark. But if it does need to be amended, he'll have the numbers by the end of this week, so we would have to do it before the full board meeting. So if there is an adjustment to the computer equipment, that $4,000 allotment, I wanted to just bring it up in the committee meeting because it's something that the department heads definitely want the legislative board to be aware of if there is some kind of an adjustment to any line items.
Alex?
We can make that amendment right at the regular board meeting, though.
Yes, the full board meeting. He just wanted to let us be aware
Okay.
that there may be an adjustment to that line item.
Okay.
Any other discussion?
Yes. Of course, the bulk of this money is going to be to pay the company, but that line item is just referred to as miscellaneous supporting services. That's
Yes.
okay.
Any other discussion? All those in favor of moving to full board?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Carried. I need a sponsor for a resolution amending 2014 operating budget, post-closure manager operations.
Make a motion.
Alex? Barb? Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Carried. I need a sponsor in a resolution approving real estate and equipment transactions in connection with the dissolution of MOSA and authorizing county executive to execute necessary documents.
I'll move.
Ryan, second. Barb, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, move to full board. I need a sponsor and a second for a resolution authorizing county executive to execute termination and assignment agreement and access agreement with Montgomery Otsego Schoharie Solid Waste Management Authority.
Motion.
Alex, Barb, discussion? Barb?
I think this ties up all the loose ends. I think that this has been a lot of ground covered in a very short period of time. So, good work.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Move to full board. All right.
Motion?
Is there a motion? Okay.
Excellent.
We need to use music playing when we're moving.
We're going through all of this tonight. It's 6:05,
Bruce
right?
Lee, the mouse in your pocket?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, maybe not all of it.
Oh, look, mine is.
I'd like to call the meeting of the Education Government Committee to order. First off, any discussion items from committee members or other legislators? Hearing none. Oh, we've got discussion item. Can I do procurement first and keep charter till after? Yeah, okay. Got a couple things on the docket for tonight, but I want to start with procurement policy. The resolution sent out, we're going to strike and remove that resolution. And the reason behind that is, if you, in your information on your desk, there's add-on number 1 for education and government is a resolution adopting the introductory local law B of 2014, a local law adopting Montgomery County procurement policy. After discussions between the county executive and myself, we believe that adopting this procurement policy by a local law would be a preferred route to go because it would give it a little more bite and a little more strength behind it, and also will become part of administrative code. So I will sponsor this resolution, and I'd look for a second on the resolution. Seconded by Barbara. Discussion on the resolution. First off, we all have the resolution in front of us. Everybody's got a copy? Okay. Legislator DeChessie.
Just by way of procedure, how does this work with local laws and public hearings? When are the hearings held, before or after?
Do you want to answer that?
They're held after the legislative action. The public hearings are conducted by the executive after the legislature adopts it, assuming it does.
And that's a very good question. In prior years, you would introduce the local law, establish a public hearing, and then vote on the local law after the public hearing. Under the new charter form of government, the local law is introduced, and then there's a 10-day period that it needs to sit in front of the legislature before it's voted on. At that point, the county executive has a time frame in order to hold a public hearing and then either approve or veto the local law, and then it would go into effect. So it's a little different there. Now,
The timeline.
timeline for this one is actually it's something that I want to discuss. One of the other items on the agenda for this evening, but this one, it was emailed out Friday. Now, with that 10-day gap, that does not count the day it was sent out, it does not count the day it's voted on, and it does not count Sundays. Which means that if this resolution is passed on to full board, there will only be 7 days in between when it was emailed out and when it would be voted on. However, there can be there's a technical term, or is it just
a message of necessity
message
or
of
urgency
necessity?
By the executive? And Andrew and I just discussed this timetable came about in discussion this afternoon. Voting on this on the 22nd would be contingent upon the county executive issuing such a message between now and the 22nd.
And if not, we would not be able to vote on it on the 22nd. So that sort of covers the local law procedure. Barbara, did you have?
I just wanted to say I spoke with the county executive today, and he's very happy with it. He thought he had a very good communication with yourself and the county attorney, so he's very, very happy with this. So it was nice hearing that. He did send out an email to all of us, but it was also nice hearing his interpretation of all of it and how it came about. So I commend you on your work for it.
Thank you. It really was a collaborative effort between all parties involved, and it's a good balance that encourages transparency and accountability at the county level with taxpayer dollars. Further discussion?
Chair.
Yes, Legislator Diamond.
The only thing I would say is that we're actually diminishing the authority of the executive by limiting him. And I mean, ideally, procedure-wise, I would like to see the charter amended first and then the procurement policy put up to local law.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. This was actually a major concern in putting this together. And the county exec reached out to the director of NISAC for an opinion on that. And he believed, in his opinion, and he's an attorney, that it was fully within the delineated powers of the charter, given section 1505 or 6. That this was something, not only was it mutually agreed upon, but that it did not go against any particular clause in the charter. And that, like I said, that's an opinion. And that's, what we would rely on, and it was mutually agreed upon, so I don't foresee any conflict. The county exec is very excited about this. When we finished negotiations on this and had that draft policy, it was a very nice moment because it really represents both parties very well.
Well, I think it does. I think the only part that is lacking, and I'm not opposed to this. I think it's a good idea. I mean, I'm really not that concerned when Matt's here, but if we get another county executive, there may be a concern. My concern, I think, is the people didn't vote. I understand Matt's happy, everybody's happy. I'm not sure the people are happy. The people voted for the charter as it is. So my point is, and it's no more than a comment, is that the people voted for the charter. I just like to see them be involved in the change. And I'm not sure if one comes before the other.
Well, and I think, absolutely, I agree with you wholeheartedly. The only stumbling block with that is if we were to incorporate language, alter that language in the charter, it's a mandatory referendum change. So it would not go into effect until January of next year. Now, as you're well aware, procurement policy, we've been operating without a procurement policy, one that could be used since January 1, and this is something that's used every day. So it was the decision of I won't speak for Doug, but the executive and myself, that we really needed to put this forth, having that gentleman's agreement, so that we have this law in place, and this will be incorporated into the suggested charter amendments going forward. But at this point, there's no direct conflict.
Okay. The thing also is, the appropriations are made for this year, and according to the charter, the executive would react to those appropriations. So, I'm not really sure there's, if Counselor says there's a urgency to it, I'll take his word for it.
Would you care to make any comments?
I will. While I certainly respect the sentiment that Legislator Diamond is stating, having looked at this, I would say that it's important that we have a procurement policy that's usable in place. Right now, the one that we have is simply obsolete because obviously it refers to offices that don't exist any longer.
Sure.
If we don't do it now, we really would then have to wait to, at the earliest, January 1st of 2015. That's assuming that it gets before the public at a referendum in November and is adopted. I would recommend going forward with putting a procurement policy in place and having your proposed charter amendments as they come along be reflective of what you have here.
Are you all set?
Yeah, thank you.
Legislator Wheeler?
I just wanted to add, and I do respect your opinion, that one of the things that Steve Aquario has said, while there's definitely some things we need to change in the charter, he has complimented this procurement policy as an example of a leader. So coming out as a leader in Montgomery County is something that I commend Ryan and Matthew for us, for the legislative body and the county executive. So looking forward to fixing the charter for certain things that maybe need some adjustment, but I look forward to it. So thank you.
Just a quick comment, I think, and I agree wholeheartedly with your viewpoint, but I think we'd be doing the taxpayers a disservice not having this policy in place and in effect during this year until such time we can fix the charter.
Legislator Kelly?
Roy and I talked on the phone yesterday, and we discussed, are we limiting the executive powers? And, I think in some areas we may be, but at the same time, the current executive, has seemed to really positively receive the idea of having a limit on some larger contracts and other things that would come across his desk. And I think it puts in a safety net and spreads the responsibility out to the legislative body along and shares it with the executive office. However, I do, the people of Montgomery County voted for separation of powers. Now, I don't want, it's a tight rope. I don't want to cross that and meddle into the executive office. That's what the people of Montgomery County voted against, and that I understand where Legislator Diamond is coming from, and it has the blessing of the current executive, and at the same time, we work well with Matt. 4 years down the road, maybe there won't be such a harmonious relationship between the legislative body and the executive in the future.
Thank you. And this was something that that Matt made the comment when we finally came to this final product of, it was such a weight off, and I can only concur, a weight off our chest, because this is one of the biggest things in the charter that needed to be ironed out, so to speak. And looking at the 17 other counties with elected legislative, executive forms of government, the stark majority all have this sort of cleaner delineation, so that there is a protocol. And this, moving forward, will, as long as it goes through the legislature, will be the format for contracts in any charter amendments. Further discussion? All in favor of moving to full board?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? And that passes unanimously. The next add-on is a resolution naming individuals responsible for purchasing. This is a resolution that, going through general municipal law, we found needs to be done biennially, naming the officials responsible for making purchasing decisions. So this will coincide with our new procurement policy. I'd look for a sponsor. Legislator Wheeler, in a second. Legislator Diamond. Any discussion? Yes, Legislator
Yes.
Wheeler.
If there is someone who is retiring or leaves for some reason from one of these positions in a few months or halfway through their term, would we then replace them or?
What we can do is, since this is a resolution, is we can, let's say an appointment comes down for a department head. And I would say all of the cases, the person making those decisions is going to be the department head. That resolution confirming that appointment from the county exec could have the language naming them as the individual responsible for purchasing decisions. And that's, as you can see, there's one vacancy as of now. However, there's another individual on this list that is retiring within the month, and that's how that will be handled. And that's why we're doing this by resolution, because it's something that can be done a lot quicker and adapt to those changes in the legislative heads and, or the department heads. Excuse
Excellent.
me.
Thank you.
Legislator DeJesus.
Not for nothing, you don't need names at all, why not just use the title?
General municipal law requires the name and title to be done biennially and by the governing board of the municipality. And this is something that, you know, we came across and put together at the end of last week. Any other discussion?
Well, I would think if there was a change in position, the executive could always procure anything for that department.
And that's exactly, you know, right now we see that there's a vacancy in the purchasing agent. Well, there is no purchasing agent. And because that is under the direction of the executive becomes the de facto purchasing agent.
Sure.
So that is absolutely correct. Any further discussion? All in favor of moving to full board? Opposed, abstained, and that passes. The next item on for discussion is the Mohawk Valley and Niagara County Assessment Relief Act. This is a state piece of state legislation that was passed earlier this year, I believe. In the budget, that provides a real property assessment relief for properties and homeowners affected by the flooding in the Mohawk Valley and Niagara County in 2013. In this county, there's a number of municipalities that qualify as municipalities with damages, including the town of Minden, village of Fort Plain, the Fort Plain School District, Sanitary Sewer District 1, I believe that's all of them. I'd like to, Bob Harris, who's the assessor of town of Minden, and our treasurer, Sean Bowerman, have bounced around some numbers, and I'd like to turn the floor over. Yeah, we can, there is a resolution here it requires local municipalities to opt in. So there is a draft resolution here. I'd look for a sponsor.
I'll
By
sponsor
legislator
that.
Wheeler in a second. I'll second that. So I'd like to turn the floor over to Sean and Bob, however you see fit.
Like I said, after having a conversation with Bob, we were asked to kind of give a fiscal impact of what this would entail. Based on Bob's calculations, the total assessment reduction for those properties affected by that 13 flooding totals $1,459,500 in reduced assessment, or reduced assessment based on the damage done by the flood. And to go one step further, if the county was to opt into this and these individuals were to receive a refund of their 14 county taxes. That total would be $17,664. And that reduction would go forward from year to year because Bob might want to touch more on the assessments going forward.
Yeah, the number that Sean just threw out, it's not a hard number, and the reason is, I've tried to identify all of the properties within the jurisdiction that I could find. And the properties that qualify would qualify at various levels, and if you opted in for the 10% level, that's where that hard number came from. But the reason it's not a hard number is some of these properties are not residential properties, they're not going to qualify. Some of the properties, the property owners have walked away from. Some of the property owners are probably not going to apply. And then also you've got some property owners that are going to apply that of course won't agree with the number that I've come up with, and they do have review rights through the Board of Assessment review. So they might get a larger reduction than what I had originally projected. So that's sort of where we're at with that number. But it's fairly close. I think I've gotten 99.9% of all of the affected properties in the town of Minden. And so I think that number is going to be fairly close. Okay?
Thank you very much. This legislation, local municipalities are required to opt in if they choose to do so by May 15th, and that's why it's being treated as an add-on this evening. The percentage that Mr. Harris mentioned, the state legislation allows for assessment relief on properties that received 10% damage or greater. Now that is a number, if we choose to move forward with this, that the county can set. They can set it at 10 or whatever percentage we see fit. Yes.
Can I just add, unlike Hurricane Irene, in 2011, the legislation that was passed, if the property got less than 50% damage, the property was not eligible for any property tax relief under whatever taxing jurisdiction they opted into. As you just mentioned, there's the 10% level, 20% level, all the way up through. So the jurisdiction has a choice. They can opt in, but they can opt in at certain levels.
Are there any thoughts at what level, Legislator Kelly?
As someone who works for a local municipality as an assessor, what will be the actual impact at different, if we, what level would you recommend we set it at?
I would like to say this, that I've worked ever since the flood, and I've worked in the town of Minden probably 6 years. The folks there are really good, honest, hard-working folks, and they've taken quite a hit. And I can't speak for the finances of the county, but I certainly hope you could provide them whatever relief you could certainly justify, because they need it. They need the help.
And I think with those sentiments, that's at least in my opinion, one of the reasons that we need to support this legislation at the 10% level. Yes, Legislator Wheeler.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, I went up there and they have gone through major devastation. So I will support this. I think for a total county value of $17,654. And not all people will even do it. Some people are so proud, even if they have over 50%, they probably wouldn't. So I absolutely will support this.
Good.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Legislator Kuchar.
I just, at first blush, a 10% number seems kind of low.
We do.
But when you think about someone with a modest $80,000 home, say, and they've got over $8,000 of damage, that's a pretty hefty bill to have to pay. I think any help we can give them would be great.
Legislator Kelly?
How many people have walked your length? At this point, I would say,
Or a percentage of damage?
all the affected properties, I'm guessing maybe 7 or 8 at this point. And the flood, the way the flood hit the town of Minden and the village of Fort Plain, for example, on Abbott Street, there were some residential properties totally destroyed. As everyone read in the news about Ethel Healy, her entire home was washed down with her in it, and she perished in the flood. 2 houses down from that, there's a residential property that had very little damage. So it was very selective. It would hit a bunch of properties, and then it would skip, and then hit some more. Other areas going up Route 80, as you head out of the village of Fort Plain, there were single-wide mobile homes that were washed away, a lot of garages, sheds, a lot of personal property was lost as well. And again, that was spotty, as depending on how the creek happened to go over the bank and how it happened to hit.
And just for clarification, if somebody sold it privately to another person, does this transfer with the new owner?
No, not at this point. Now, there's some clarifications that need to be looked at, and I'm in the process right now working with the county real property director, and her and I have had conversations today and last week, and we're going to be talking with the legal counsel in Albany, because there's some special implications for the village of Fort Plain, which don't affect you folks here at the county, but there's some issues about the village of Fort Plain that we've got to work out.
Thank you. Further discussion? Would it be the recommendation of the committee to move to full board at a 10% loss level? All in favor of moving forward as such?
Aye.
So you're having sponsored and seconded that way with the 10?
Yes.
Yep. Yes.
So just so it's clear that you sponsored and seconded and agreeable to that.
Opposed? Abstaining? And that passes.
Right.
Okay.
Do we need to have a transfer of money, or does that need to be addressed?
I don't know that we could make that transfer at this point.
There's no budget amendment either. If this was actually approved and went through, which would be a refund on the real property tax line.
Thank you.
Other than, those are the 3 resolutions that I have for this evening. However, I do want to bring you all up to date, and gauge some of your opinions on different things going on with the charter. As you know, we've been, Doug and I have had a couple meetings now to go through charter questions, and we're starting to get a good sense of what needs to be done moving forward. And we're trying to get a sense, what I'd like to do this evening is get a sense from the legislature on some different issues on how to proceed. I'll give you an example. The first article that Doug and I sat down to go through was Article 8 on the Department of Law. Lengthwise, this represents about 4% of the charter, but there were 17 separate changes, whether it be grammatical, clarifying some language, and these are proposed. I should make that very clear. But with that, if that trend were to continue over to the entire charter, we'd be looking at about 400 different changes. Now, all amendments to the charter need to be amended by local law. Those that do not transfer powers of elected officials are a local law that needs to be passed by 2/3 vote of the county legislature and is subject to permissive referendum. Any that change powers of elected officials go to mandatory referendum. So my first question to the committee and legislature as a whole, with that sort of ballpark number in mind, there's a lot of things in the charter that need renumbering. You know, there's a section that goes A, B, D, E, that would have to be treated as a separate local law. We've had some discussions about splitting the question. And I'd like to gauge the legislature's opinion on whether we would like to move forward treating these amendments by individual changes, which could potentially get into hundreds of local laws, by the article as a whole, which probably would be under 30, or by one local law amending the charter in its entirety, accepting those changes that require mandatory referendum, which would be done by separate local laws. So I think I just threw a lot of information at you, but I want to turn it over. Yes, Alex.
I like option 3.
I like option 3.
Entirety.
I like option 3.
Okay. Any other opinions? I don't want to, this is something that we are, we're working, Doug and I are working together on this, and we're trying to include everybody possible. And we want, the intent wholly is to present a document to the legislature that everybody is on board with. But if there's one T that, one of us really is opposed to, we don't want that to be something that's going to, come up at last minute. And that's why I'm asking this now.
Now, who is it exactly that determines that it requires public referendum?
Well, as our charter is written, there's two forms, and if a charter amendment transfers or could be construed to transfer powers of elected officials, that would require mandatory referendum. So that would go on at earliest in November and go into effect at earliest January 1, 2015. So that would be, I'll give you one example. There's a power and duty under the executive that says central mailing and tabulation. That was copied over but does not apply to Montgomery County. If we were to suggest removing that line of tabulation, that would have to go to basically any changes to Articles 2 dealing with the legislature, Article 3 dealing with the county executive, the article dealing with financial control, the county treasurer, and Article 15, which is general and transitional provisions that deal with the county legislature, the executive, the treasurer. Those would have to, any changes really to those articles will have to go to referendum. Now at that point, we could treat all of those as one, or we could treat the legislative article, the executive article, the treasurer article as separate ballot propositions. That may have implications on if one passes and another does not. It may create another headache down the line. So that's something that we're sort of, we were discussing timeline with that today, and really we have until July to pass any local laws that would require mandatory referendum. Now, ones that would require any others that do not, so let's say data processing is not included in the charter. So if we want to create an article in the charter creating a Department of Information Technology Services, that does not require, we can pass that by local law at any point, and that's subject to permissive referendum. Meaning if there are a certain number of individuals that petition to have a referendum, it would go on the ballot. Otherwise, it would not. So with all of that in mind, I don't think, it doesn't sound like anybody wants to treat them as individual changes. But basically the three options would be individual changes, article by article, or in its entirety. And even if we were to treat it article by article, we would likely have to have a local law amending in its entirety to rearrange everything, so that it flows properly. After going through this and seeing the amount of changes that need to be made, my personal opinion is that treating it in its entirety would be the cleanest way to go. Would you have anything to add to that, Doug?
Well, I certainly would not recommend option one of doing potentially several hundred local laws, some of which could be adopted with the permissive referendum provision and some with the mandatory. That's unwieldy, and it would be counterproductive in my view. Beyond that, the doing it in, well, I won't say one fell swoop, but two fell swoops, one involving a series of provisions which the legislature can adopt subject to permissive referendum, and then a series of them for mandatory referendum. You will not run into, you should not, if it's done properly, run into the problem of the passage of some and the failure of others, creating inconsistencies within the document. The downside of it is, probably certainly among the 9 of you and among the general public, there are going to be things in a package deal that you're going to like, and there are going to be some things probably on an individual basis that you don't care for. And if it's an all for nothing proposal, obviously both you folks and the general public in November would have to say, does the good outweigh the bad?
Mr. Chairman, obviously, I see where this is headed with respect to voting on something in its entirety, but one of the problems that I have with that has to do with that this is coming out of a committee, and all of the legislators are not members of the committee. And we're starting to see now through the committee system where decisions are basically made via committee. If the 5 votes are there coming out, then off we go. And so essentially, legislators would not be heard before the decision was made. There are legislators who do not serve on this committee who would not have the opportunity to argue their point in timely fashion. If it was coming out of committee with 5 people supporting it, then that argument is done. It's not heard. So I have a problem with that. I think if we include the entire board, turn this into a committee of the whole to address those changes, then everyone will be represented, everyone will be heard.
Absolutely, and I wholeheartedly appreciate that. And that's been a main topic of discussion, is how to involve everybody so we can present one package that everybody's happy with, or at least is happy enough with. And with that in mind, I think moving forward, and I want to go through a couple topics tonight that I think are worthwhile to discuss in public session, but I would like to start, as things come up, to send out, and it's something that we probably cannot address only at committee meetings, but send out emails to all legislators gauging general feelings, a straw poll, if you will, on certain ways of doing things, so that everybody is involved. And we know that any amendment needs to have supermajority support. So if there is a proposed amendment that has 2 people supporting it, that's not something that, as a legislature, we should, I believe, or as chair of Education and Government, pursue as an amendment to the charter, because there's not the support there. But if something has unilateral support, that's something that we can move forward with.
Would it be safe to assume that a majority of the changes were ones recommended by New York? In that red line?
It would, well, let me put it this way. The ones addressed by NISAC in the red line charter mainly are changes that deal with changing the powers of elected officials. So those are mostly ones that are going to have to go to mandatory referendum. However, and I'll give you the glaring example in parentheses where it says need to check on this. NISAC did not comment on that. And there's areas where language needs to be cleaned up, and I think everybody that reads through the charter a couple times will agree with that. So yes, the NISAC red lines will be addressed, but there will be additional ones. And while we're on the topic of NISAC, and I can't, once we have a confirmation from Steve Aquario and Patrick Cumming, they're hoping to come out at the beginning of May to meet with the legislature to go through the red line with us, as they did with the former Board of Supervisors. But yes, it's going to be a lot of those big ticket things, but also little ones that we're all probably going to be able to agree on, you know, re-lettering, you know, so it follows the alphabet and doesn't leave out letters, you know, things like that.
One thing I just wanted to add, I think part of this structure, and even with the Board of Supervisors, it's a problem that I had with the former, and I think that Legislator Duchessis adds a good point, but I think we are helping to foster a new forum. If you're not on, as well as with the new rules of procedure, the whole budget and finance is all of us. So even if you're not on the education and government, we welcome comments and communication with all of us, because it does require, in some cases, votes from 2/3 or a majority. So while if you're not on it, there's always communication. Martin's next. So it was a frustration. One time I was only on one committee, and for someone who really loves their job and wants to participate, it can be frustrating if you feel like you have no voice. So.
Well, I happen to be on the committee, but I just...
No, I know you are, but I think that your point is 100% valid, and I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Legislative Hill.
This is a serious issue that we are going to have to tackle. And I do agree with what Duke is saying. Why don't we move forward as a committee of a whole when dealing with the charter so that we all have a say, you know, at what is being proposed. And I really like to have the open communication through email. I think that the best form of the best way of making an informed decision is to have the open dialogue. So that's what I think.
Without amending the rules of procedure, I can make the commitment from my end that any type of communication will be going to every single legislator. Is there a more formal way, and this question is going one to you, Doug, and two to you, Cheryl, of having temporarily the education government meeting as a committee of the whole without...
Well, Doug, you could answer, but I mean, a committee of the whole is just that, so that would be chaired by the chairman of the legislature.
And I'm not saying the education government, I'm saying actually, you know, we've had a committee of the whole to discuss MOSA.
Right.
I think the charter should be.
Committee of the whole meeting.
Yes.
Okay. Very good.
Which
There's no
time-
reason that it
which
couldn't
time
be.
would chair?
It wouldn't have to interfere with the other business of this committee.
Right.
It could be done separately, and I don't want to speak for the chairman of the legislature, but if you are more involved
Yeah.
with the preparation of the material, there may be some agreement as far as who's going to preside over the session, but being that all 9 would be included both in the discussion and in any recommendations that are made to the full board.
Okay. Great.
That's very logical.
Legislator Diamond.
I think I would recommend, as Legislator Kelly said, have our chairman create a committee of the whole for the purpose of the charter, and I would recommend that Legislator Weeks chair that committee.
Thank you.
And the other thing I would just throw out, I think emailing information is good as far as responses from legislators. I'd rather see it in the open and not as part of openness in government instead of straw polls or whatever. I don't think that's productive. Just my opinion.
So I think we can pass that on along to Tom. Now there are a couple topics that have been brought to the attention of myself, and